Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Democratic House Caucus. It is Tuesday. I'm Lori Houghton. I represent Association. We're going to get right into it since everyone's hungry. Just a quick announcement. We are going to do a caucus of the whole tomorrow, Wednesday. So what will happen is we will gavel in at 1 o'clock as normal. We'll go through any resolutions and announcements, and then we will move to caucus of the whole to talk about the budget. I just want to update everyone. The budget was voted out of committee, House Appropriations yesterday on an 11-0 vote. Great. So they will review that, and then we will do an education update as well. And then we will gavel back in for the orders of the day. So that is tomorrow. Again, just a reminder, if you're going to be absent from the building at all, please let Karen or I know. So we're going to jump into topics. We're going to start with H479, which is our housing bill. Come on up. Jump right in.
Yeah, okay. So yesterday, I was one of about a half dozen legislators who went to Hubbard and Forge and got this great tour. And at the end, led by the CEO of Hubbard and Forge, 200 employees there. And at the end, we got into a conference room. She sat down and the first thing she said is housing. We need housing. We can't keep people. We can't hire them. And I would say we heard that message again and again and again from the 54 witnesses that we took. The omnibus bill is just a beginning. What it does is it makes it a little easier to permit housing. It makes it harder to challenge housing. It makes it easier to finance the infrastructure of the housing, easier to it encourages the building of the housing, and it contains funding for a little less funding as it emerged from approach than we had hoped, but naturally funding for all different kinds of rental, ownership, housing, for programs that just insert money in rental housing that's dilapidated, programs that fund permanently affordable housing, et cetera. There's a concern around the state that housing, there's a lot of dilapidated housing that is just rotting, and it's an opportunity. And so there's a study that's come out, and we funded a further study to look at ways to create a land bank or other devices to facilitate the acquisition of dilapidated housing. I think I'll stop there.
Great. What was the vote in committee?
10-1-0.
Wonderful.
It was a bipartisan. Generally, I find it's a bipartisan issue.
Yeah. Great. Any questions?
You had two questions. Oh, what? Yes.
Candace White from Wakefield, thank you. Quick question, would you mind going into some more detail on the dilapidated housing provisions?
Right. At the outset, I want to say one thing. There's a tendency to say, maybe there isn't a housing problem. What we have is too many short-term rentals, too much dilapidated housing. If we just address that, it would be better. Unfortunately, to put it in context, that's not true. We need housing of all sorts, and a lot of it. As to dilapidated housing, there's two approaches. One is to make it, a lot of those housing are owned by people who are absentee or owned by an estate, and they're not paying their taxes. And so one approach is to make it easier for towns to actually move quickly on a tax sale. The second is to look for ways to acquire that housing. And in other states, a land bank has been the device that has been used. There is a report favoring land banks here, and the report, what we did is ask for specific legislative proposals, including funding sources.
Who else had a question? Is there any other questions? Great, thank you, Mark. This is on the floor.
On the floor tomorrow. Right.
All right, next up, we have been asked to use the microphone. So next up is Charlie Kimball with the yield bill 491.
Just hold your applause.
Get applause if you go fast.
I told her to go fast. So, hi, my name is Charlie Kimball from Woodstock, representing Windsor 5, a member of the House Ways and Means Committee. So we voted out of committee a House Ways and Means committee bill, to set the yield for property tax rates for fiscal year 26. So just want to say from the beginning, the vote from the committee was to lower property taxes from a projected increase of 5.8% to lower it to 1.1% on average across the state. So that's what the impact is of the yield that we set. The yield does a number of things. I mean, we set 3 different things in there in the bill. So we look at 3 different rates. One is the yield on the homestead property. The other is the yield on the yield on the non-homestead property, or the rate on the homestead property. And the third is for income sensitized, the income yield. So those are the 3 things that we voted on in the bill. And it utilizes money that was recommended by the governor coming from the general fund, $77 million, to reduce the amount of property taxes that need to be raised, and results in that average 1.1% increase in property taxes projected. The process that precedes our vote is that the Commissioner of Taxes delivers a letter, the December 1st letter, which is a consensus forecast of what the property taxes will be based on what school budgets have done and based on what revenues are coming into the state, so that school districts can budget more succinctly and accurately about what the impact is going to be on their voters and on property tax rates overall. So that December 1st letter was issued by the Commissioner of Taxes, Craig Bolio, and that had a projected increase of 5.9%. And then in January, when they were fined, it came down to 5.8%. And so that's what we were looking at the revenue forecast for all of the other things that affect the property taxes or the education fund. And one thing that we've talked about before is that the mix of funds that come into the education fund is not just property taxes. I mean, property taxes are about 63% of the education fund. The rest are coming from a lot of different funds, like the sales and use tax, a portion of the rooms and meals tax, a portion of the purchase and use tax, and even the lottery proceeds. So those all come into the education fund to help fund education. So 63% property taxes, 37% from other sources. So that's basically the gist of the bill. My full report is about 45 minutes long. So I'll spare you that.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any questions? Has fun.
Oh. Hi, Tom Hughes. Charlie, thank you for that. Can you give us a rundown on the financial implications for next year by using the $77 million to buy down the rate this year?
Sure, I'll do a couple of things. One is we have posted to our webpage both the education, a fiscal note, which includes the education fund outlook. So if you look for details, it is posted to our webpage, so you can see all the details there. What is the impact of using the funds coming from the general fund on next year? We don't know yet because we don't know what next year is, but it basically, if you take general fund money and use it to reduce the amount to be raised by property taxes, and that money is then not available in the following year from the general fund, then you have to increase the revenue sources to make up the difference between that 77 million. That could come from property taxes, it could come from other sources. So the reason why I say we don't know yet is it does put us in a position where we're going to have to figure out how to fund it otherwise.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Molly Burke. Brattleboro, does this change anything in the income sensitivity?
It does not for fiscal year 2026. We are working on a comprehensive education transformation where we're looking at a new property tax credit program to introduce. We're working on a new foundation formula to be not introduced in fiscal year 26, but in years out. So those are, and also we're working on a reappraisal system that's going to provide more consistent valuation of properties across the state. So we're working on those things, but it's not for fiscal year 2026.
Great, Angela will be our last question.
Angela, and just to follow up that question, is it safe to say that those changes are also not predicted to take effect in fiscal year 27?
That's correct. Until 2027. Yep. Our effective dates haven't really lined up yet because we have to make sure that whatever we come up with a new property tax credit and whatever we come up with a foundation formula has to coincide with new school districts and a lot of that kind of stuff. So the timing isn't yet set, but so we're trying to align our timing with what the education committee does. So that's all very much still in deliberation. So this week and next week, we'll have more details on that.
Okay, but to be clear, any financial hole that is created by the infusion of the buying down of the artificial suppression of the property tax rate this year using the money from the general fund transfer will not be addressed by a new foundation formula or a new funding formula in the following fiscal year. School districts will have to make up that hole, most likely.
Again, it's a decision that we would have to make, whether it's coming from general fund or from other sources of funds at the state government level.
Great, so this is on the floor Thursday, Friday.
Okay.
Great, we have two more, H397, amendments to the statutes governing emergency management and flood response. We have a duo here, Representative Byron and Teddy, I'm sorry, I don't say your last name.
Teddy's fine.
Okay, great.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so H397 is an act relating to miscellaneous amendments to the statutes governing emergency management and flood response. So this is building off of work that we did last biennium. The bill starts off by requiring more coordination between RPCs, League of Cities and Towns, and long-term recovery groups. It requires report back on the evolution and progress of these programs we've set forth over the last couple of years to government operations committees. It allows for some money out of the pilot fund to be used to assist municipalities to help out with strained budgets and whatnot after flood damage and recovery costs, help transition while they're waiting for support money. This was a recommendation of the governor. It requires the establishment of a state framework for the flood preparedness and recovery response. As well as originally this bill came in with a focus on flooding, but with the larger scope of different events that could occur, we've dropped some language in there to address things as all hazards. So it'll cover everything, whether it be like weather or man-made. We didn't want to like isolate extreme events within statutes, so it's got a bit more of a broad capture. It creates a voluntary buyout program for flood-prone areas. And it helps municipalities by allowing the state to supply a required FEMA match to help bridge what is often a slow inflow of federal money. Let's see, it codifies the state's sort of like a FEMA department in statute that was set up as a temporary thing, and now we're going to have that in more perpetuity. It also sets up funds to help homeowners after rebuilding with more of a resilient framework within their properties. Technical assistance for infrastructure building in municipalities. And it requires a plan to create a more comprehensive communication network. There's a lot of different resources that notify Vermonters when there's an event going on. We're still trying to hone that in. We heard from some rural areas that there could be some like antiquated communication there. So it is really just focusing on making sure that all Vermonters, vulnerable populations are notified when there is an extreme weather event or man-made, all hazards. And it also allows, there's one provision that allows the governor and A&R under one of these designations for an extreme event to draw down dams in anticipation of like a high amount of water inflow. And you remember a couple of years ago during the July 23 event, there was a lot of concerns over dam region. So we picked up word that came out of a study after the fact, a bill that was put forth by a couple of members that was included in there. Ways and Means actually did a significant amount of work on this bill as well, and has a notable amendments, so I wanted to pass things off to Rep. Teddy.
Thank you, Matt. Teddy Wazizak, Berry City. Yes, we have 6 amendments from Ways and Means, realistically 5 amendments, which I'll explain in a second. The first one would have allowed rebuilding of flood resilient housing in FEMA bought out, in state bought out properties. So we amended the bill to allow that and quickly discovered that it is a whole can of worms with probably a year's worth of work to figure out. So Rep. Kornheiser is going to bring a floor amendment to basically put the language back to as passed out of GovOps. So when that happens on the floor tomorrow, that's why that is. The governor's recommended municipal tax grand list stabilization program. It was the pilot fund that Matt was just talking about earlier. The governor called it a voluntary buyout reimbursement program, and there were just too many sections called voluntary buyout that we felt it was confusing. So we just renamed that to the Municipal Grand List Stabilization Program, thanks to some wordsmithing in committee. We took out a section that was about how municipalities are able to service their debt. We took that out just because there's a lot more, also more complicated than we had originally thought. So we took that section of the bill out to dive into that more in committee. Excitingly, we are addressing the local options tax revenue share. Right now, it's 70 stays with the municipalities, 30% goes to the state pilot fund. We're adjusting that to be 75-25. There's a fiscal note that dives into that, and we are also extending. After the 23 floods, the legislature allowed education fund reimbursements for taxes abated because of a flooding event. And we're just extending that to cover the 2024 floods as well. And then we changed A to the, that one. And we changed the effective date of the flooding abatement program, just to allow that to go retroactively to the expiration of the program this past November. I think that's it.
Great. Any questions? This is on the floor tomorrow. Fabulous. Oh, there it is.
Oh,
Will has one.
almost.
Oh. You need. Big microphones.
Regarding the local options tax, is that the one, so I know when we use local option tax, we're usually referring to the rooms and meals, the alcohol provision. I know there's 3 categories there. What about for short-term rentals for some municipalities that are either trying to impose a local option tax, the equivalent of one, or for communities that already have? I'm just curious if that 75-25 split apply to that, or is that something completely separate?
That's not in this bill. We received the housing bill that did have the additional 1% local options tax for the short-term rentals. We removed that section from H 497, 479, 479. This one's 97. After testimony from the tax department, it would be very administratively challenging to implement that, and the legislature implemented a 3% tax on short-term rentals just last year. So doing another 1% on top of it this year felt a bit premature, give the 3% time to go into effect and study how that's working, but that's not in, that is in the housing bill, not this bill.
The reason I asked that was because that was something that was passed in our charter, and then it's taking around a 1% additional tax on top of the 3%. And I just didn't know if that was affecting the proportion of their share that they would.
If that is a local option tax, yes, this, the 75.
And it would have.
Yeah.
Great. All right, on the floor tomorrow. Thank you both and committees for hard work. No, Phil next. He's hungry. We're getting going here. So next is, lost my notes, the T-bill 488.
I heard some growls when they said I was coming up, and I'm sure those are stomachs. So I'll make this quick. The T-bill's much shorter than I've seen in the last couple of years.
And let's see, there's a slight change to the Green Mountain Transit charter because it now says they have to serve X amount of communities, and there's some discussion of moving Green Mountain Transit's routes to rural routes, so this just allows that charter to do that. We do a couple of good things for two programs in state aid town highways. We are putting in an inflation index on those two funds so that they don't remain stagnant forever. So if the CPI goes up and or the T fund bill goes up, then those two will follow it. It's a similar formula to another highway transportation grant program that we did a couple years ago. So it's sort of the same program. The big one that might have some questions is the mileage-based user fee for battery electric vehicles. We're hoping to have that thing ready to go come next year, July of 2026. And so that's our intent to do that. This is only for full battery electric vehicles, not plug-in hybrids. Those would continue to pay the infrastructure fee they pay with the registration. And so it says the intent of this is to have full battery electric vehicles pay this mileage-based user fee based on how many miles they drive to be the equivalent of what they might be paying for gas tax. And that includes state and federal. So today, the federal government doesn't collect anything from battery electric vehicles. So potentially that's a fund, some revenue for the state to use until such time they might do that. A couple of good things is we continue the program, ACCD program, where they've gotten funds from the infrastructure fee from battery and plug-in hybrid electric cars. Have started to pay this fee. Those funds, 1.4 million, will go to their program, which is helping to fund charging infrastructure at condos, apartments, public buildings. And then the last thing is we've transferred some money from Electrify Your Fleet program, which is an incentive program for businesses. That hasn't been taken up as much as we thought it would be. So we're going to transfer some funds to Drive Electric Vermont, which is partnered with the agency to give better education and information about electric vehicles. So they'll be able to continue that program. They voted out 1100. There may be a one-word technical correction that comes out tomorrow too.
We're gonna get at this. Thank you. Any questions? Oh, question. Turn it back to you.
For my seniors.
Wow, nice. Parts of Holly, Washington 6. Is there any movement at all or discussion of going to a user fee, mileage-based fee to fund all the costs? I mean, gas tax keeps going down. It's a problem.
So we know that gas tax, because of efficiency, which is a good thing, forget electric vehicles for now, because of efficiency, that the gas tax revenues have gone down for about 20 years, almost 20 years. So there's not been any real action on it. We've had some discussions about it. And I brought up at committee that maybe this mileage-based user fee should be indexed. And if we did that, to inflation, maybe we could do the same thing to the shall not be said gas tax. But nothing right now, nothing in this bill. That's correct. So gas tax just remains the same.
So for the mileage usage fee for electric cars, any discussion about excluding out-of-state miles?
That's been brought up, the fact that you can't capture how many miles are in state and out of state. And so it can't be done. And I think we've discussed that, you might buy your gas in Rutland and drive to work in Albany and, and you're paying gas tax here. You're not paying it to New York. Also,
I sort of counter that as saying, yeah, that could be a concern for some people that they drive out of state and they're paying mileage-based user fee, but they're not paying any gas tax, federal or state, when they're driving out of state.
I would just say my car knows exactly how many miles I drove in Vermont and outside of Vermont, so the data is there.
Great, thank you, everyone. Just a reminder that I am doing office hours, 3:30 to 4:30 in the cafeteria, if anyone wants to come chat. And I hope you go have a wonderful lunch.